too as well.
Well, talk to your attorney.
They were warned not to come to my home. They were threatening to harm me. She's just as much responsible for this as I am. She should have stopped him.
I tried.
No, you didn't.
What would drive a man to pick up an AK-47 and fire at someone he once loved? This isn't just another crime story. It's a chilling tale of obsession, jealousy, and a final act of deadly rage. In the quiet streets of Phoenix, a breakup turned into a bloodbath, leaving one man dead and another facing a lifetime behind bars. But what really happened that fateful night? Before we dive into this gripping case, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more real-life crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.
I suggest that you not make any statements. If your attorney was here, he'd tell you just to shut up.
The air was crisp that December evening in Phoenix, Arizona. It was just 2 days before Christmas, and the streets were alive with holiday lights and last-minute shoppers. But for Keshawn Stewart, there was nothing festive about that night. He had only one thing on his mind: getting as far away from Khalid Williams as possible. Keshawn had tried to move on from the relationship, but Khalid wasn't ready to let go. And that night, as Keshawn sat in his car with his pregnant girlfriend, he had no idea that his past was about to catch up with him in the most violent way imaginable.
This man opened fire on a car with his ex-boyfriend inside and that man's pregnant girlfriend. The father of her unborn baby was killed. Officers booked 33-year-old Khalid Williams on 4 felony counts, including first-degree murder. Police say he and 35-year-old Keshawn Stewart broke up in October, and on Monday, investigators say Williams and his ex were arguing over the phone about a car. Police say Stewart and his now girlfriend went to Williams' apartment near 19th Avenue in Maryland, where the men got into a fight.
A sudden, chilling sound cut through the air: gunfire. The first bullet shattered the back window, spraying shards of glass inside the car. Keshawn's girlfriend screamed as more shots followed, their deafening echoes bouncing off the apartment walls. It all happened so fast. Blood. Silence. A desperate race to save his life. By the time paramedics arrived, Keshawn was barely clinging to life. Keshawn Stewart was a man who had dreams, just like anyone else. He had worked hard to build a stable life, and when he met Khalid Williams, it felt like a fresh start. They shared laughter, secrets, and moments that seemed unbreakable. But behind the smiles, an unsettling darkness lurked beneath the surface of their relationship. No one could have predicted that the love they once shared would spiral into something so deadly. It started with small fights, disagreements that seemed harmless at first. But those fights grew, turning into explosive arguments that left scars deeper than words could describe. By October 2024, Keshawn knew he had to walk away. He wanted something better, something different. And just when he thought he had found happiness again, his past came back, armed and ready to take everything from him. For many, the story of Keshawn and Khalid seemed like just another failed relationship, but those close to them knew it was much more than that. Keshawn Stewart, 35, and Khalid Williams, 33, had been together for years before their toxic relationship finally crumbled in October 2024. The breakup should have been the end of it, but Khalid refused to let Keshawn go. He called him constantly, sent threatening messages, and showed up uninvited. Things got worse when Keshawn moved on. He had started dating a woman, and just a few months into their relationship, she became pregnant with his child. To most people, this would have been good news, a fresh start, a chance at happiness. But to Khalid, it was a betrayal. He wasn't just angry, he was furious. His emotions twisted into something dark and uncontrollable. And when he found out Keshawn was coming to his apartment that night, he made up his mind. If he couldn't have Keshawn, no one would. After leaving Khalid, Keshawn found solace in the arms of another. A woman who made him feel alive again, a woman who was carrying his child. For the first time in a long time, Keshawn saw a future filled with hope. But for Khalid, there was no moving on. The thought of Keshawn loving someone else, starting a family without him, was unbearable. It gnawed at him, turning his heartbreak into hatred. Khalid's friends noticed the change in him. He spoke less, but his eyes burned with resentment. He drank more, stayed out late, and obsessed over Keshawn's life. When he found out that Keshawn's girlfriend was pregnant, something inside him snapped. If he couldn't have Keshawn, then no one could. The tragedy could have been avoided. Friends recalled how Khalid's obsession with Keshawn had turned dangerous months before the shooting. He was possessive, manipulative, and had a violent temper. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Keshawn told his friends he was afraid. He knew Khalid wasn't thinking rationally anymore. On December 23rd, Keshawn and his girlfriend went to Khalid's apartment. Whether it was to collect something or settle unfinished business remains unclear. But what is clear is that by the time they left, Khalid was filled with rage. He watched them go, his hands gripping the weapon he had illegally obtained. He had a choice: let Keshawn live his life, or end it forever. He chose the latter. Keshawn received an unexpected message from Khalid. A simple request to talk. Maybe it was closure, maybe it was an apology. Keshawn didn't know. But against his better judgment, he agreed to meet at Khalid's apartment. His girlfriend hesitated, sensing something wasn't right, but Keshawn assured her it was just a conversation. As they pulled up near 17th and Maryland Avenues, the air felt heavy. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that warns you something terrible is about to happen. Inside the apartment, Khalid paced back and forth, his fingers twitching, his mind racing. He wasn't planning to talk. He was planning for something much, much worse. Khalid was no stranger to crime. A convicted felon, he wasn't even supposed to have a gun. But that didn't stop him from acquiring an AK-47 style rifle. That night, as he stood at his window, watching Keshawn get into his car, something inside him snapped. He grabbed the weapon, stepped outside, and raised it with deadly precision. The air inside the apartment was suffocating, thick with unspoken words and lingering resentment. Keshawn took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He didn't want another argument. He had come to clear the air, not to reopen wounds. But Khalid wasn't interested in closure. He wanted control. His hands trembled as he clenched and unclenched his fists, his jaw tightening with every second. Keshawn noticed the way Khalid's eyes darted toward the back room, as if he was waiting for something, as if there was something lurking just beyond sight. It made his stomach turn, but he refused to let fear take over. Instead, he sighed and said, "I don't want any trouble, Khalid. I just came to talk." But Khalid wasn't listening. His mind was a storm, a swirling mess of anger and rejection. He couldn't stand the way Keshawn looked at him, like he was a bad memory, a past mistake. His heart pounded against his ribs, his breathing uneven. "Talk," he scoffed, shaking his head. "You think you can just talk and fix everything? You think you can walk away and forget me?" His voice cracked on the last word, a sharp edge of pain creeping in. Keshawn shifted uneasily. He had seen Khalid upset before, but this was different. There was something unhinged in his eyes, something dangerous. The urge to leave surged through Keshawn, but before he could make a move, Khalid stood up abruptly, his body tense. The conversation had reached a breaking point, and neither of them knew just how close they were to disaster. Keshawn could feel it in his bones. He needed to leave. Something wasn't right. His instincts screamed at him to walk out the door and never look back. "Look, man, I don't want to fight," he said cautiously, raising his hands in a placating gesture. He took a step back toward the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. Khalid's gaze darkened, his body shifting ever so slightly to block Keshawn's exit. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Panic clawed at Keshawn's chest. His eyes flickered to the door, measuring the distance, calculating his chances. Khalid wasn't a big man, but he was unpredictable, unstable. Keshawn knew he had seconds to act. In one swift motion, he lunged toward the door, grabbing the handle. But before he could yank it open, a sharp pain exploded at the back of his head. He stumbled forward, vision blurring. Khalid had struck him, hard. Keshawn hit the floor, the world spinning. His last thought before darkness took him was that he had made a terrible mistake coming here. When Keshawn opened his eyes, the first thing he noticed was the pounding in his skull. A dull, relentless ache that made it hard to think. His vision was blurry, his limbs heavy. He tried to move, but something wasn't right. His hands, they were bound. Panic shot through him like ice water. He struggled, twisting his wrists against the tight restraints, but the more he fought, the deeper they dug into his skin. He was trapped. Khalid sat across from him, watching in silence. The expression on his face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something terrifying. "You should have never left me," Khalid murmured, shaking his head. "We were supposed to be together." Keshawn's stomach churned. He had known Khalid had trouble letting go, but this was something else. "Let me go," he demanded, his voice hoarse. But Khalid only smiled, a slow, eerie smile that sent a chill down Keshawn's spine. Not yet. Keshawn's mind raced. He had to think fast. He had to get inside Khalid's head, find a way to reach him before things spiraled further out of control. "Listen, man," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You don't have to do this. Whatever you're feeling, we can talk about it. I don't hate you. I just needed to move on." His words were careful, deliberate. He didn't want to set Khalid off. But Khalid wasn't listening. His fingers twitched against his knee, his breathing shallow. "You don't get it," he muttered, shaking his head. "You were my world, Keshawn. I gave you everything, and you threw me away like I was nothing." His voice cracked on the last word, his face twisting with pain. "You think you can run off and have a happy little life? Have a baby? Start over." His hands balled into fists. "I won't let you." Keshawn's pulse thundered in his ears. He had seen anger before, but this was something else. This was pure obsession. Khalid wasn't just hurt, he was broken. And broken people did dangerous things. Keshawn knew if he didn't get out now, he might never get out at all. "I don't want to fight," he said again, his voice low, soothing. "We were friends before anything else, Khalid. You don't want to hurt me." But Khalid let out a dry, humorless laugh. "That's where you're wrong." He stood up, pacing the room, his hands shaking. "I've already lost you. What do I have left?" His voice was barely a whisper, but the words sent a shiver down Keshawn's spine. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about control. And Keshawn knew that once a person like Khalid felt like they had nothing to lose, they became the most dangerous person in the world. Keshawn's mind raced, searching for a way out. The pain in his head throbbed, but the real danger wasn't his injuries, it was Khalid's unraveling state. He had to stay calm, had to keep Khalid talking. "You're not thinking straight," he said slowly, forcing his voice to remain steady. "We had good times, didn't we? You don't want to ruin everything by doing something you can't take back." He watched Khalid's face, searching for a crack in his rage, a moment of hesitation he could use to his advantage. But Khalid's expression remained dark, his hands gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles turned white. "It's already ruined," he muttered. His voice was eerily calm, detached, as if he had already made his decision. "You left. You didn't care. And now, you think you get to walk away like nothing happened? No." He stood suddenly, pacing the room, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Keshawn knew that Khalid was at a breaking point, and a man on the edge had nothing left to lose. Outside the apartment, the world continued as if nothing was wrong. People walked past, cars honked, and life carried on. But inside, Keshawn was trapped in a nightmare, and he had no idea if he would make it out alive. His girlfriend was waiting for him in the car. Would she come looking for him? Would she call for help? He swallowed hard, pushing the thought away. He couldn't rely on someone saving him. He had to save himself. Khalid stood by the window now, staring outside, lost in thought. Keshawn seized the moment. "Khalid, let me go," he pleaded. "This doesn't have to end badly. If you let me go, we can figure things out. You don't have to do this." For a second, just a second, he thought he saw doubt flicker across Khalid's face. But then it was gone, replaced by something even darker. Khalid turned back to him, his jaw clenched. "You still don't get it," he said, shaking his head. "You don't have a choice." Time was slipping away. Keshawn knew that the longer he stayed, the more dangerous this situation would become. He had to act soon. He tested the restraints on his wrists again, wincing as the ropes dug into his skin. His fingers twitched, searching for a weak spot, something he could use to break free. But the knots were tight, and Khalid had tied them well. Meanwhile, Khalid had gone eerily quiet. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, his fingers tapping against his knee. It was the kind of silence that made Keshawn's blood run cold. Was he thinking? Planning? Deciding whether or not to kill him? Keshawn's heart pounded against his ribs. Every second that passed, every breath he took, felt like it could be his last. Outside, Keshawn's girlfriend checked her phone again. It had been too long. She frowned, glancing up at the apartment window. Something didn't feel right. Keshawn had promised he would only be a few minutes. But 20 minutes had passed, and there was no sign of him. She debated what to do. Should she go inside? Should she call someone? Was she overreacting? But then, she remembered the way Keshawn had looked before he went in, hesitant, uncertain. A chill ran down her spine. Something was wrong, and she wasn't going to sit in the car and wait for something terrible to happen. Back inside, Keshawn knew he was running out of time. He could feel the tension in the air, thick like a storm about to break. Khalid was spiraling, sinking deeper into whatever darkness had taken hold of him. And Keshawn knew that if he didn't escape now, he might never get another chance. "Khalid, listen to me," he said again, keeping his voice steady. "We can fix this. You don't have to do anything crazy." He tried to inch his wrists against the rope, biting back a grimace as the fibers burned against his skin. He had to get free. He had to, before Khalid made a decision he couldn't take back. Khalid's head snapped up suddenly. Footsteps. Someone was outside. His fingers twitched, his breath hitching. Was it Keshawn's girlfriend? A neighbor? The police? Had someone called for help? Keshawn saw the panic flash across Khalid's face, and for the first time, he felt hope. Maybe he wasn't the only one who knew something was wrong. Maybe someone would come in. Maybe he would be saved. But that hope was short-lived. Because Khalid, instead of panicking, reached under the bed and pulled out something Keshawn hadn't seen before. A gun. Keshawn's breath caught in his throat as he saw the gun in Khalid's hand. The metal gleamed under the dim light, a silent promise of danger. This was no longer about an argument, no longer just a moment of rage. This was a matter of life and death. Keshawn forced himself to stay calm, to keep his expression unreadable. If he panicked, if he made the wrong move, Khalid might pull the trigger. Khalid ran his fingers over the weapon, his grip tightening. His eyes were wild, his mind trapped in a dangerous storm of emotions. "You never really cared about me, did you?" he asked, his voice eerily soft. Keshawn swallowed hard, choosing his words carefully. "I did care, Khalid. I still do. But this isn't the way to handle things." But Khalid wasn't listening anymore. His finger hovered near the trigger, and Keshawn knew. One wrong word, one wrong move, and this would be the end. A loud knock shattered the silence. Khalid's body tensed, his eyes darting toward the door. Keshawn held his breath. Was it his girlfriend? A neighbor? Could this be his chance to escape? Khalid's grip on the gun tightened as he stood, his entire body radiating tension. "Stay quiet," he hissed, pointing the gun at Keshawn. "If you make a sound, I swear I'll—" He didn't finish. The knocking came again, louder this time. Keshawn's heart pounded. He had two choices: stay silent and hope whoever was at the door would leave, or scream for help and risk Khalid pulling the trigger. His mind raced, calculating his chances. But before he could decide, Khalid moved swiftly to the door, pressing his back against it, listening. Whoever was outside wasn't going away. And that made Khalid even more dangerous. Outside, Keshawn's girlfriend was growing more anxious by the second. She had knocked twice, waited, and still nothing. Her gut told her something was terribly wrong. Keshawn should have come out by now. She stepped back, glancing at the parking lot. Should she call the police? Should she try to get inside herself? Her hands clenched into fists. She wasn't going to just walk away. If Keshawn was in danger, she needed to act fast. With a deep breath, she pressed against the door again, knocking harder. "Keshawn, are you okay?" she called. Inside, Keshawn heard her voice, his lifeline, his last hope. But Khalid heard it too, and the look on his face was pure rage. Khalid's breathing turned ragged, his grip on the gun shifting. "She's ruining everything," he muttered under his breath. Keshawn felt a cold chill race down his spine. He's unraveling. He's losing control. If Khalid snapped now, it wouldn't just be him in danger. It would be his girlfriend too. Keshawn had to act fast. "Let her go," he said, his voice firm but careful. "She doesn't need to be a part of this. Just let her leave." Khalid turned toward him sharply, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was silence. Then a slow shake of the head. "No. If she knows something's wrong, she'll call the cops. I can't let that happen." His finger twitched over the trigger, and Keshawn's blood ran cold. Khalid wasn't just thinking about hurting him anymore. He was thinking about taking out anyone who got in his way. Keshawn knew this was it, his only chance. He had to distract Khalid, had to give his girlfriend time to act. "You don't have to do this," he said quickly, trying to redirect Khalid's focus. "I get it. You're hurt. You feel abandoned. But this isn't the answer." He kept his eyes locked on Khalid's, trying to break through whatever darkness had taken hold of him. Khalid hesitated, just for a second. It was enough. A sudden loud bang at the door made him flinch. His girlfriend had started pounding, shouting now. "Keshawn, open the door. What's going on?" The moment of distraction gave Keshawn the chance he needed. With a deep breath, he threw himself forward, kicking out his legs, slamming into Khalid's knees. The gun wobbled in his grip. This was his moment to escape. The room erupted into chaos. Khalid stumbled back, cursing, but he didn't let go of the gun. Keshawn lunged, twisting his body, trying to knock the weapon from his hands. They crashed against the small table, knocking over a lamp, sending shards of glass across the floor. Keshawn felt a sharp pain in his side, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Khalid fought back, wild and desperate, his grip like iron. He wasn't going to let go. Keshawn gritted his teeth, using every ounce of strength he had, but Khalid was relentless. The gun jerked between them, dangerously close to going off. One pull of the trigger, and it would be over. Keshawn's muscles burned, his breath coming in short gasps. He had to win this fight. He had to survive. And then bang. The deafening sound of a gunshot tore through the air. For a split second, everything froze. Keshawn gasped as pain exploded through his shoulder, a hot, burning sensation that stole his breath. He staggered back, his vision blurring. Khalid's eyes widened, as if he hadn't expected the shot to go off. Keshawn collapsed against the floor, his head spinning. He tried to move, tried to stay awake, but his body felt heavy, his limbs weak. He could hear Khalid breathing hard, could see the gun still shaking in his grip. The pain was unbearable, but Keshawn knew one thing for certain. If he passed out now, Khalid would finish the job. Outside, Keshawn's girlfriend heard the gunshot, and her heart nearly stopped. She didn't think. She just acted. She grabbed her phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. "Someone's been shot. 17th and Maryland. Please hurry." She didn't wait for an answer. She ran. The front door was locked, but she wasn't going to let that stop her. She grabbed a rock from the parking lot and slammed it against the window. The glass cracked, splintering. Inside, Khalid spun around, startled. He wasn't expecting someone to break in. That moment of distraction would be the difference between life and death. Keshawn's breathing was shallow, his body struggling against the pain. The gunshot wound burned like fire, but he knew he couldn't stop fighting. He forced himself to stay conscious, to keep his eyes open. If he blacked out now, he might never wake up. Khalid stood over him, the gun still in his hands, his face twisted with something unreadable. Regret? Rage? It was impossible to tell. Outside, the sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. Khalid's head snapped toward the window, his eyes wild. Keshawn's girlfriend was coming in. Her desperation had turned into action, and that meant help was on the way. Khalid cursed under his breath, his mind racing. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't planned for someone to fight back. And in that moment of hesitation, Keshawn saw his chance. With every ounce of strength left in his body, Keshawn pushed off the ground and lunged forward, slamming into Khalid's legs. The impact sent them both crashing to the floor. The gun slid across the room, clattering against the wooden floorboards. Keshawn gasped in pain, his shoulders screaming in protest, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Khalid roared in frustration, scrambling to grab the weapon. But before he could reach it, Keshawn's girlfriend burst through the window, her eyes wide with horror. She didn't think twice. She grabbed the gun. Her hands shook as she pointed it at Khalid, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Stay back," she screamed, her voice breaking. For the first time, Khalid looked afraid. The room was a mess, broken glass, overturned furniture, blood staining the floor. Keshawn was barely holding on. He pressed his hand to his wound, trying to stop the bleeding, his vision blurry. But then, through the haze of pain, he heard it. Sirens. Faint at first, but growing louder. Help was coming. Khalid's breathing was ragged, his eyes darting between Keshawn's girlfriend and the door. He was out of options. The gun was no longer in his hands. The police were on their way, and the realization of it hit him hard. He had lost. His hands trembled as he took a slow step back, his mind racing for an escape route. But there was none. This was the end. The front door burst open, and officers flooded into the room, weapons drawn. "Drop the weapon. Hands in the air." The commanding voice rang out like thunder. Khalid flinched, his face pale. His entire world had come crashing down in a matter of minutes. He lifted his hands slowly, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Keshawn's girlfriend wasted no time. She dropped the gun immediately, stepping back as the officers moved in. Two of them rushed to Keshawn's side, their voices urgent. "We've got a victim down. Call for an ambulance." Keshawn tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his body weak. He had made it this far, but he wasn't safe yet. Would he survive the night? Khalid didn't fight as the officers grabbed him, forcing his hands behind his back. The cold metal of handcuffs clicked into place, the final confirmation that his fate was sealed. He didn't speak, didn't resist. It was over, and he knew it. As they led him out of the apartment, the flashing red and blue lights reflected off his face, illuminating the haunted look in his eyes. Outside, neighbors had gathered, murmuring in hushed voices. What happened? Did someone get shot? The whispers surrounded Khalid as he was shoved into the back of the squad car. From lover to murderer, from freedom to a lifetime behind bars. In the blink of an eye, everything had changed. Inside the ambulance, Keshawn drifted in and out of consciousness. He could hear voices, feel hands pressing against his wound, but everything felt far away. His girlfriend sat beside him, holding his hand tightly, whispering to him. "Stay with me, Keshawn. You're going to be okay." But was he? The pain was unbearable, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, memories flashed through his mind. How had it come to this? He had loved Khalid once. They had shared a life together. And now, he was fighting to survive because of him. Would he make it? Or was this the end of his story? Days later, Keshawn woke up in a hospital bed, bandages covering his shoulder, the steady beep of a heart monitor filling the room. He had survived. The realization hit him hard, sending a wave of emotions crashing over him. Relief, pain, anger. He had come so close to dying. And all because someone he once loved couldn't let go. The news played softly in the background. Khalid Williams, 33, has been arrested and charged with first-degree murder and illegal possession of a firearm. Authorities say the attack was premeditated and fueled by jealousy. Keshawn closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. He had survived. But the scars, both physical and emotional, would never fade. Keshawn lay in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. He was lucky to be alive. The doctors told him the bullet had missed any major arteries, but the recovery would be long. His body ached, but the real pain was deeper, the emotional wound that Khalid had left behind. His girlfriend sat beside him, her fingers wrapped around his hand. "You scared me," she whispered, her voice shaking. Keshawn squeezed her hand weakly, a silent promise that he wasn't going anywhere. But deep down, he knew nothing would ever be the same again. He had survived, but at what cost? The man he had once loved had tried to kill him. That reality was too much to process. Would he ever be able to move past this? In a small, cold jail cell, Khalid sat on the cot, staring at the wall. He hadn't spoken much since his arrest, only answering the officers' questions with short, clipped responses. What was there to say? He had lost everything. He had been so consumed by rage, by jealousy, that he had destroyed not only Keshawn's life, but his own. His lawyer had visited earlier, telling him the charges he was facing. First-degree murder, illegal possession of a firearm, attempted homicide. Khalid barely reacted. The words felt distant, as if they were happening to someone else. He thought about Keshawn, about what he had done. Had he really meant to kill him? Or had he just lost control? Did it even matter anymore? His life was over either way. The first time Keshawn saw Khalid again, it was in a courtroom. Khalid looked different. His usually well-groomed appearance was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit and tired, hollow eyes. But there was something else. He wouldn't look at Keshawn. He kept his head down, his hands clenched. The judge read the charges, and when asked how he pleaded, Khalid's voice was barely above a whisper. Not guilty. Keshawn's breath caught in his throat. Not guilty. After everything? After nearly killing him? Anger surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. The trial hadn't even begun yet, and he needed to be strong. He wanted justice, and he wasn't going to let Khalid walk away from what he had done. The trial date was set, and the media picked up the story. Love turned deadly. Man survives jealous ex's attempted murder. The headlines were everywhere. People speculated about what had driven Khalid to such extremes, but Keshawn didn't care about the theories. He cared about the truth. As he prepared to testify, he realized how much his life had changed. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, struggling to sleep, haunted by nightmares. The physical wound was healing, but the emotional scars were deep. His therapist told him it would take time, but how do you heal from knowing someone you once loved wanted you dead? The courtroom was silent as Keshawn took the stand. His hands felt clammy, his heart pounded, but he held his head high. He was here to tell his story, to make sure Khalid didn't get away with what he had done. He recounted everything, from the moment Khalid invited him over to the second he pulled the trigger. At one point, his voice wavered, but he didn't stop. I trusted him, he said, his throat tight. I never thought he would hurt me. But he did, and if I hadn't fought back, I wouldn't be standing here today. When he finished, he exhaled shakily. Khalid still wouldn't look at him. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he wasn't. Either way, it didn't change what he had done. Khalid's lawyer tried to paint a different picture. He claimed Khalid had acted out of passion, that he wasn't in his right mind. They called witnesses who spoke about his struggles with mental health, about how the breakup had destroyed him. They wanted the jury to see Khalid as a broken man, not as a cold-blooded attempted murderer. But the prosecution had a different argument. This was not a crime of passion. This was premeditated. Khalid invited Keshawn over. He tied him up. He got a gun. And when he lost control, he tried to kill him. The courtroom was tense, the weight of the truth settling over everyone. This wasn't just about a relationship gone wrong. It was about an obsession that had turned deadly. The jury deliberated for hours. Keshawn sat in the courtroom, his hands gripping his knees, waiting for the moment that would define the rest of his life. Would Khalid be held accountable? Or would he walk free? Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the jury returned. The courtroom hushed as the verdict was read. We, the jury, find the defendant, Khalid Williams, guilty of attempted murder. The words echoed in Keshawn's ears. It was over. Khalid sat still, his face blank. No outburst. No reaction. Just silence. The judge announced the sentencing date, and just like that, Khalid's fate was sealed. When Khalid stood before the judge for sentencing, the courtroom was packed. The world was watching. The prosecution pushed for the maximum sentence, arguing that Khalid had shown no remorse for what he had done. He had planned the attack. He had pulled the trigger. He had tried to take a life. Khalid finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost hollow. I lost control. I regret what I did, but I can't take it back. The judge studied him, then delivered the sentence. Khalid Williams, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The room was silent. Justice had been served. For the first time in months, Keshawn felt like he could breathe. Khalid was gone. He couldn't hurt him anymore. But even with the trial over, the wounds remained. He still had nightmares. He still flinched at loud noises. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was a slow, painful process. But he wasn't alone. His girlfriend was by his side, his family supported him, and therapy was helping. He had survived something unimaginable, and now he had to rebuild. He wasn't just a victim. He was a survivor, and he was determined to live the life that Khalid had tried to take away from him. Keshawn stood outside the courthouse, staring at the sky. So much had changed. He had come so close to death, but he had fought back. He had won. But this wasn't just about him. It was about others too. How many people had been trapped in toxic, dangerous relationships? How many had been afraid to walk away? He wanted to share his story, to help others see the warning signs before it was too late. Love wasn't supposed to hurt. It wasn't supposed to end in violence. And if his story could save even one person from going through what he had, then maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all of this. With one last deep breath, he turned away from the courthouse, ready to step into the future. A future that was finally his own.